we see it as other, and sometimes as a symbiote. And so many of these analyses are grounded in much more traditionally humanist approaches. They're very anthropocentric. They very much value the human at the center of that dialogue. So viewing the avatar as a tool, for example, implies this kind of hierarchy where the avatar is an object, and it is separate from and subservient to the player. And this aligns with many humanist ideas that we're individually in control of ourselves, that we are not impacted by external forces, that we are autonomous in that way. Whereas my work seeks to explore the avatar gamer relationship in more post-human ways. So, whereas humanism kind of comes from this perspective of the rational mind, self-control, self-responsibility, Todorov kind of states here, humanists think that the individual can achieve autonomy, that is, by act of reason, of his own will, and in accord with the laws that he himself accepts, without necessarily conceiving this to be outside the human body. Posthumanism then works in a variety of ways to reject many of the principles of humanism. On the one hand, it critical posthumanism demonstrates the idea of rethinking the liberal human subject. Essentially, because the idea of the liberal human subject is very exclusionary. There are many different versions of what actually counts as human. And this has been constructed and conceived during history to justify the whims of those in power. So Rosie Braidotti, in her 2013 book, The Posthuman, says, not all of us can say with any degree of certainty that we have always been human, or that we are only that. Not if by human we mean that creature familiar to us from the Enlightenment and its legacy, the Cartesian subject of the cogito, the Kantian community of reasonable beings, or in more sociological terms, the subject as citizens, rights holder, property owner, and so on. And so, from this perspective, what constitutes the liberal human subject is actually very problematic because it's very limited. If we think about that idea of the rights holder, rights traditionally have not been extended to all different humans in the same ways. And so, in its most basic form, posthumanism can arise from an acknowledgement of this, a kind of desire to critically investigate and redefine exactly what we mean by human and what attributes we assign to it. So, responding to this prejudiced and kind of unstable category of the human, the post-human signals, as and Catherine Hale says, the end of a certain conception of the human. And so, posthumanism being post this liberal human subject, post this understanding of humans being rational and reasonable, and a being that is kind of fixed and stable. So critical posthumanism is a field that's arisen from multiple different critiques of the exclusivity of achieving the status of human in all its privilege. Key critiques come from feminism, anti-colonialism, race studies, disability studies, and queer studies. Posthumanism also embodies this kind of idea of rethinking of the self, questioning this idea of the human being individual, autonomous, and fully in control of their own thoughts and actions. And we've seen in more recent years this kind of argument come into question. We see how the idea of the rational being can be linked to what Lisa Blackman calls the fiction of autonomous selfhood. Blackman explains, this fiction is one that assumes that the human subject is ideally bounded, responsible for their actions, self-enclosed, and able to develop or enact the capacity for change and transformation through their own agency, and as such has become part and parcel of how we are governed and managed as citizens and populations. So, what this rational subject of humanism doesn't acknowledge is the much more porous and entangled, dispersed, interconnected aspects of being that influence our daily existence. We're constantly entwined with others, human and non human, around us. And this recognition has led to a renewed understanding of how and what we are affected by and how we are moved. So the idea of also our embodiment extending beyond our skin as we are bodily affected by things beyond our physical boundary of the skin. This shows that idea of kind of boundaries that separate us from the rest of the world are really flawed when we take into perspective the different ways in which we are distributed and our awareness and agency and subjectivity are formed by things beyond that singular self idea. And through these things, we also get to a rethinking of anthropocentrism, so rethinking of a human centered approach to life. Because of this acknowledgement that we are neither stable, unitary subjects unaffected by our interactions with others, and a recognition of how badly we've classified the human and the limitations that we've put on that as an identity in terms of privileging one human over another, we've begun to recognize that the anthropocentric attitude is also flawed. Uh, as stated, our reliance on all things other demonstrates the entanglement of the human. So we only have to think about the fact that we need to breathe air and eat food and drink water to demonstrate how much of a fallacy it is to think about the self as being independent and fully in control of itself. And so we recognize in this way our reliance on others around us. And we also recognize, more importantly, their value, those others' value in their own right, non humanistically defined. And so that enables us to develop a more complex and hopefully less hierarchical understanding of humans' place in the world. If we displace the human from the center of our worldview, we begin to see the vitality of others. We can see this evident in the work of new materialists such as Jane Bennett, whose work on vibrant matter disrupts what she calls the binary of dull matter, it and things, and vibrant life, us and beings. So in doing this, the hierarchy of the subject and object is a dualism that posthumanism seeks to break down, as is the anthropocentric hierarchy of humanism. And so through these different elements, we can see how binaries and boundaries are broken down through this work, where self, other, subject, object, human, machine, and human, animal are no longer viewed in these dualistic ways. By rejecting the liberal human subject and the idea of a fixed, bounded, stable self, and rejecting anthropocentrism, we have brought into closer understanding of the importance of post-dualistic thinking. So distinctions between self and other and subject and object begin to collapse when we understand ourselves and subjects to always be entangled with and therefore constituted from others and objects around us. And this leads to a more equal understanding of the relation between human and other. So there's been a growing number of texts that explore video games and posthumanism around some of these themes. We have Bulter on how gaming interacts and narrates post-human themes. Fizek on the self-playing game as a rejection or death of the primacy of the player. Rufino on post-Anthropocene games. Keogh on avatar gamer memories as both lived and prosthetic with no individual ownership. And there's a range of different work here that covers different post-human positions in relation to video gaming. My research, on the other hand, is it explores, rather than broadening the scope of the multiplicities beyond avatar and gamer. My work retains the focus on the avatar gamer in order to explore the multiplicities evident within these entities. So, a post-humanist account of gaming could extend as far as looking at all sorts of different elements of the computer that you're playing on, the internet connection that is a part of that, the servers offshore, sorry, and how all of those things come together to shape our subjectivity and our experience of the game. Whereas I'm drawing a particular kind of boundary in a lot of my work, just to look at the avatar and gamer and explore those in more depth rather than go wider. Um, and so, as I say here, drawing on the ways in which the avatar gamer relationship goes beyond merely objective interactions between self and other, I show how the subjectivity that emerges is instead a complex, embodied interaction between different components. And this aligns with what Ferrando terms feminist ethics, which is not based on universal nor abstract categories, and allows us to focus on relationality, situated knowledges, and embodied experiences. So, this also leads into the idea of ontological inseparability. So, we have here a quote from Karen Barad, who argues that posthumanism does not presume that man is the measure of all things. Posthumanism doesn't presume the separateness of anything, let alone the alleged spatial, ontological, and epistemological distinction that sets humans apart. And so, in my work, when I talk about my subjectivity with the avatar, I talk about this being this kind of fluctuation between me and she of the avatar, and this kind of negotiation between entities that isn't stabilized. And this this kind of demonstrates what Barad terms as interaction. So she states that in contrast to the usual interaction, which assumes that there are separate individual agencies that precede their interaction, the notion of interaction recognizes that distinct agencies do not precede, but rather emerge through their interaction. So the project of interaction from Barad explores entanglement keenly. And entanglement is fundamentally an ontological reconceptualization of the human. Rather than considering the human as ontologically distinct, entanglement suggests that we are just that. We are entangled with everything around us, such to remove us from our environments, cultures, societies, natures, others, animals, machines, tools, would be to fundamentally strip us of what makes us human in the first place. And so this is an idea of the state of emergence. And it's through this lens that I explore the emergent subjectivities of gaming. So I show how by drawing on the way that avatar gamer relationship goes beyond these objective interactions of self and other, I show how the subjectivity that emerges from video game is complex and embodied as an interaction between different components. So Barad's argument that posthumanism does not presume that man is measure of all things, as we just saw, and this idea that individuals do not pre-exist their interactions, but emerge as through and part of their entangled interrelating. My research demonstrates this ontological inseparability of avatar and gamer. And so in this way, control and power are shared equally between the avatar and gamer. Each entity is needed in order to act a certain way. It's not seen as a hierarchical relationship. So rather than thinking about this in terms of the gamer being in control of the avatar, it's about looking at how the avatar and the gamer are emerge through each other as a particular way of being in the world and ability to act in the world. So um, I'm going to be speaking to you specifically about control. So I don't know if people have played Control. What have we got? Can I get like hands up if people have played Control? We've got no hands up. Okay, a few. I think there's a few coming through in the chat. Um, okay, excellent. So maybe a few people who have, a few people who haven't. That's fine. Not yet. It's definitely. I definitely recommend it, Ruby. So for anyone who hasn't played it, then yeah, I do recommend. Or watching the gameplay, also fun. So, in Control, we have it's developed by Remedy Entertainment. As we saw earlier, it's a, uh, a game that features Jessie Faden. This is her. And we play as Jessie Faden, and we start a journey looking for our brother. And we end up as spoilers, the director of the Federal Bureau of Control. We we enter this space which has a supernatural corruption by the hiss. And in this place, Jesse discovers a place of otherworldly dimensions. We can see here from the Control wiki, the actual bureau, the building that you enter that we can see here, is a place of power. This space-defying, constantly shifting labyrinth connected to various alternate dimensions through spontaneously occurring thresholds. So, to give you a kind of example of how I see different elements of post-human subjectivity emerging. I've written a fair amount on empathy and on post-human empathy, and essentially, this is where I look at the empathy that occurs between the avatar and the gamer in a way that isn't just a one-way exchange of feelings, and it's more than the impulse to just repeat an affect, but is deeply felt perspective taking that produces affective reactions beyond an individual feeling of self. So, it's worth. So, as I say, we're kind of in this Federal Bureau of Control. We've got this paranatural invasion of the hiss, and it has taken over people's bodies and staff members' bodies. And we're essentially trying to, on the one hand, look for our brother, on the other hand, negate this threat of the hiss. And in doing so, we're essentially trying to sort out all of these problems because the Federal Bureau of Control is a workplace. So there are specific moments in the game that we can see how this kind of exchange of empathy is evident. At one point, we meet Langston, who is supervisor of the Panopticon, which oversees paranormally altered items. And this is Langston on screen, and he explains that his dilemma that various altered items have escaped and are therefore wreaking havoc. And so I remember when playing this that I was really annoyed by the amount of tasks that Jesse was being given by less competent colleagues. And this feeling was perhaps heightened by Langston by this aesthetic you can see here, which is obviously purposefully created to look lackadaisical in appearance and in character. He appears ruffled, his tie is loose, his long grey hair is poorly combed over his white balding head. And then it transpires that Langston forgot one of his agents, Philip, and left him at work on fridge duty. Fridge duty was maintaining eye contact with a specific fridge that that is an altered item. And if someone doesn't maintain eye contact with the fridge, then bad things will happen. And he's forgotten Philip and left him maintaining eye contact with this fridge for over a day. Jesse's "You forgot him" in incredulous tones emphasizes Langston's irresponsibility. And it's Jesse and the player who once again pick up the pieces um, and have to relieve the agent Philip to try and complete the side quest. And so this annoyance here was shared between me and Jesse over Langston. And it's worth reiterating at this point that my first playthrough of the game was over 40 hours. And this included some side quests and some other things that kind of went beyond the official end of the game. But essentially, I found Control a hard game to play. And so encountering these seemingly incompetent workers enhanced this empathy that I experienced with and through Jessie. Her work and desire to find her brother Dylan is the central mission. And it is therefore my central mission as the gamer in order to complete the game. So again, we see those self other binaries blurring there. But throughout the game, of course, we have other obstacles to overcome, which the narrative adds. And of course, this is necessary. We need obstacles in games so that it's not a straightforward A to B, because otherwise the game would be very short. And so there would be very little narrative and gameplay. But equally, these obstacles need to be balanced. I could have chosen fewer side quests, but I was kind of trying to complete these. And so by the time I got to Langston and this guy who's just kind of incompetent at doing his job, I felt really frustrated by it. And so Elise Janish writes, women's experiences when playing games are linked inextricably to their larger life environments, such as social, cultural, work, home, and political arenas. We must remember that our experience of gender in our non-gaming lives weighs directly on the way we interact with games, gamers, and game studies. And so, in many ways, my frustration would, I suggest, be enhanced through these further empathetic lines of social and cultural empathy for a woman in the contemporary landscape having to overcome workplace obstacles. And so this experience refutes any meaningful boundary between human and non-human, the lines between the physical and the digital on screen, and the feeling of frustration between avatar and gamer merges, shaping this holistic experience of the game. The interaction then between avatar and gamer demonstrates a distributed and intermingled empathy, whereby both avatar and gamer body have the capacity to affect and be affected. And then we can see that both have this kind of vibrancy that might deem the relationship between the two as non-hierarchical, horizontal, and heterogeneous. And so my concept of a post-human empathy is therefore decentralized. It is not owned by either the game or the gamer. And so in Control, we have that kind of initial self-other blurring between the gamer and the avatar, where ideas of subject and object kind of collapse as it is through that much more, as say, sort of horizontal relationship that we're actually able to do things in the game. We have to see both parts as equally valuable and important. And then in Control, this post-human subjectivity of the avatar gamer is reflected in the post-human subjectivity of Jessie. Because Jessie has an entanglement with a paranormal entity known as Polaris, who Jessie is in psychic contact with. And Jessie considers them an ally and talks to her. Jessie characterizes Polaris as female. She talks to her throughout the game. So just a reminder that I'm using critical posthumanism, critically disrupting the assumptions of the liberal humanist agenda, including anthropocentrism, dualistic and hierarchical binaries such as human machine, human animal, self other, subject object, mind body, and disrupting the subject centered worldview wherein we're individual and autonomous and fully in control of ourselves. Instead, I'm looking at this interaction and entanglement with others, including non human and human others. So it might also be environments, medias, and technologies. And so, by entering into this understanding of post dualistic entities, we understand our capacity to act as being emergent from the assemblages that we are part of. So, like say in the game, we are part of the assemblage with Jessie. But Jessie is also never fully singular, and she is never the humanist, individually bound self because she is never fully alone or individual due to her entanglement with Polaris. So we have Jessie on the right here. Polaris is sort of visually signified by this kind of, it almost looks like a dragon eye there, which is less, I think less what it actually looks like. It's kind of, uh, I'm not even quite sure what you would call it, but that kind of shape with a kind of shine to it. Um, and so Polaris guides Jessie and the player by highlighting key areas to explore in the game. Um, and it's thanks to Polaris and this kind of possession by Polaris or this relationship with Polaris that Jessie is protected from the hiss. And so Jessie herself would be considered more than human, displaying what Braidotti terms a new sensibility in welcoming the alien and the monstrous as sites of affirmation and becoming. As Karen Barad argues, the other, the constitutively excluded, is always already within. The very notion of the self is a troubling of the interior exterior distinction. And this is literally the case with Polaris, who is cognitively inside Jessie. The boundaries of self and other don't adhere here to these internal and external codes. As Berg has argued, Jessie and Polaris represent the co-inhabited avatar, a game design trope at which the player avatar is possessed by another consciousness, shared between bodies, or corrupted by an outside narrative agent. And I would argue that this corruption is a post-humanist corruption of the liberal human subject. Because of their entanglement, because of Jessie and Polaris's entanglement, we too are entangled with Polaris. And so here we can see that kind of image of Polaris there on that particular in the middle of the view there, and Polaris highlights key areas in the game that we need to engage with or head towards by appearing in this kind of layered way over particular areas. And so when Polaris highlights those key areas to explore, we are seeing essentially through Polaris's eyes and with their knowledge. And so our navigation of the game space is interdependent on Jessie and on Polaris. So we can see here how this kind of comes to demonstrate that agency is not an individually owned trait, but as Barad says, is not agency is not an attribute, but the ongoing reconfigurings of the world. Here, our capacity to take action in the game is an interaction between player, controller, machine, avatar, and the avatar is an interaction between the human person characterized by Jessie and the ways the entity of Polaris enables Jessie to see things differently. So, in my previous research on World of Warcraft, in the book Post-Human Gaming and other publications, I wrote a lot about the idea of this shifting sense of self. When I'm talking about how binaries sort of break down between self and other, that can be quite uncomfortable to acknowledge because selfhood is such an integral way of part of how humans understand the world. And so, when we talk about I do this, I do that, it sounds very individualistic. And so I wrote about how I could be experiencing things, reflecting on gameplay experiences um, to sort of explore the boundaries of self and other and how we articulate those. And it's interesting because Jesse also navigates some of the same issues around identity and the questioning of the other. Jesse's internal narration of her thoughts in the game operate not only as a narrative for the player, but as a one-sided conversation with Polaris. And so Berg continues by saying the co inhabited avatar not only complicates player expectations of immersion, but combines extant discourse on defamiliarization, the fourth wall, and narrative surprise. Um, and so this is evident as Jesse refers to Polaris as an unidentified you, implicating the player. So this is a long quote, but this is from Berg, and I think it's really interesting. Berg says, as the opening lines of Control and Hellblade illustrate, you called me, so here I am. So that's the first line that we hear from Jesse. You called me, and here I am. And Berg continues, these lines provoke an interrogation of embodiment, prompting the player to ask, who is the you here? In Control, the player can't immediately know. The ambiguous you is in Jesse's internal monologues is pervasive in the first several hours of gameplay. For example, when Jesse enters the director's office to find the previous director dead with a gun by his body, she says, you want me to pick it up? The murder weapon? Really? You could be an in-narrative entity, but also obliquely refers to the player who is pressing the button to pick up the gun. Jesse's invocation of a you continues through to the final scene, with her last lines being, we're in this together, you and I. And so we see here how agency is, again, reconfigured differently through the game space by Jesse's engagement with Polaris, but also through Jesse's appointment as the director of the Bureau of Control. So Jesse finds the body of the previous director, Trench. This is very near the beginning, so it is a spoiler, but it's not too much of a spoiler. She finds the body of the previous director, Trench, next to a gun known as the service weapon. Following a cutscene sequence where Jesse is transported to the astral plane, a non-human entity, the board appoint Jesse as the new director because of her ability to wield the service weapon. We are now director of the Federal Bureau of Control. And this is the bureau that we have just found out exists. The bureau has been infected by this hiss, which the wiki describes as a hostile paranatural force of resonance. And Jessie, as director, now has her own paranormal power to wield. And in order to find and save her brother Dylan, she must conquer the hiss to recover him. So, considering again the quote from Barad, agency is not an attribute, but the ongoing reconfigurings of the world, we can also see how this is evident in how Jessie is able to reconfigure the world of the Bureau differently through and because of her interaction with the service weapon. Her entanglement with this weapon alters her whole subjectivity. So there are new ways in which we can engage with the game of space, and we can navigate space, new actions that we can take that are through this interaction with the service weapon. Beyond the kind of exploration of multiple agencies and entities that allow the post-human subjectivity of the player, Jesse Polaris, to emerge, there is also an interesting element of how we can see the world of work being treated in the video game. So this is a very kind of neoliberal environment, and it's very much a kind of in that, from that perspective, neoliberalism obviously again focuses very much on individuality, on hierarchy, on competition, and on sort of binaries, and on us being in control of ourselves enough to progress in particular ways. So In Control, what we see through Jessie as well is an interesting resistance to hierarchies through her role as director. She's supposed to be the person in charge, but she is deployed on an ever increasing number of tasks and quests for those below her. Um, and so this might just be a mirroring of the barriers to success in the workplace, but also we can see through the way that Jessie responds to these different situations, um, how Jessie as a character demonstrates this willingness to get her hands dirty and to help out across all sectors and departments. And this demonstrates an intersectionally feminist rejection of both hierarchies and rejection of the neoliberal focus on individuality and the self. Jessie operates for the good of the Bureau. And so she also has different relationships with other characters in the game. For example, she has a relationship with Artie, who is the janitor. So when we arrive at the scene of the oldest house, the janitor directs us where to go. He says, "There you are. You are here about the job, janitor's assistant. You need to go to the interview. Go that way to the elevator. Very good. I'm Artie, by the way, the janitor. You'll work for me. You can say I sent you." So following this slightly bizarre and unexpected instruction, Jessie internally reflects, and I've done enough night shift loner jobs to know what it makes us come off weird. Artie, the janitor, is a friendly face in my book. And so from the outset, we are introduced to an ideology coming from Jessie of valuing those who work in blue collar roles. And in many ways, this initial positioning distances Jessie from some of the pitfalls of both white feminism and neoliberal subjectification and the hierarchies implicit within certain elements of humanism. Intersectional feminism allows an inclusive consideration of oppressions and the ways in which this occurs across different experiences. And so we have different elements across Control that reject this neoliberal positioning through a focus on solidarity, assistance, and non-dominant modes of being. And this in itself becomes an embodiment of post-human ethics and values, rejecting those binaries, hierarchies, and focuses on individuality and the self as singular. As we see how these relationships are about helping one another. We also see how Jessie meets Arish, security chief of the maintenance sector. And we get a sense of how she feels comfortable being around people like Arish. She says it, she thinks to herself in response to something he says, "I've done a few odd jobs with these kinds of folks. They say what they mean. I like that." And we get a sense of Jessie being comfortable around people in roles that might be considered lower status. And this is a kind of demonstration of resistance to an identity linked to corporate power over others. She frequently asks NPCs to call her not to call her director or Director Faden, saying, "Just call me Jessie." And so this rejection of those kind of structures seems to demonstrate that she rejects also the idea that the director has higher cultural, economic, and neoliberal capital than a janitor or a security chief. And so her view of these NPCs as being those to be respected embodies an intersectionally feminist sentiment of equality and equity, valuing all people and rejecting intrinsic superiority, despite her role as director. Engelbrecht suggests that intersectionality and inclusivity have been identified as two more pivotal fourth wave ideals that should be embodied by the fourth wave heroine, as well as male-female camaraderie. and working together with male characters without becoming romantically involved in them. So I would argue that Jesse's relationship with Artie and Arish demonstrates Jesse's embodiment of both fourth wave heroine attributes. But I would also argue that this is indicative of a post-human feminism, as the post-human or material or ontological turn in feminism is also an ethical term. That's a quote from someone else, but I'm afraid I've left out their name. And so to conclude, I consider the relationships and roles that frame Jesse within this world to be one of a post-dualistic understanding. Jesse's relationship with Polaris might be considered as an alliance per Braidotti, that, as Braidotti says, allows shared critiques of binary power relations and distorts self-representations to reveal the inner workings of their relational political economy. Beyond merely exploring the relationship between human and machine, this work also aligns with what we talked about at the beginning, Ferrando's terms of feminist ethics, which is not based on universal nor abstract categories and allows us to focus on relationality, situated knowledges, and embodied experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wild, for this very insightful and exciting talk. Do you have my voice, guys?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Very well. Now, before opening the floor to our participants to ask their questions, it might interest you to know, Dr. Wall, that our students and researchers here at Shiraz are particularly interested in video game studies, as evident in the growing number of dissertations being written in our English department. So I'm particularly excited about the questions coming from the audience shortly. Now, if I may, I'll begin the Q&A with a question of my own. So during your lecture, especially the theoretical framework section, you rightly included the animal, our non-human and more than human others, as integral to the philosophy of post-humanism. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the representation of animals in video game industry today and its cultural products. Actually, one of my own graduate students is currently writing her thesis on the game Stray, the recent indie video game through which we, as players, get to play a feline character and in the process experience some form of post-human embodiment. Yet, such revisionist narratives notwithstanding, to what extent, Dr. Wild, do you think the Anthropocene is contested or challenged in the more mainstream products of the video game industry?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. So in about 10 days, I am going to Mexico to the Digital Games Research Association conference, DIGRA, and I'm going to be presenting on Stray. So Stray, also an excellent game for anyone who hasn't played it. And I think it's a really interesting example, Stray in particular, because it is a post-apocalyptic world. There are no humans left. And what's interesting in my experience with Stray as a video game is that despite the fact that you are playing as a cat and there are no humans, and you are your other the NPCs in the world are either mobs or cyborgs, or robots essentially. For all that, it's still a very, very human world. It's still based on very human structures of society. So the robots are called companions, and they have come to embody different, very human-like qualities. They wear clothes. They have familial relations with one another. They call it there's a father-son relationship. And so the game is, despite being post-humans, literally, all humans are dead and gone, there are no humans. It reinscribes very humanistic ways of being. And that is also evidenced through your playing of of the cat, because essentially you are being guided through the game by a drone. And the drone is, again, I don't want to spoil all the games, but the drone is, let's say the drone is very anthropomorphic. It communicates, it talks, and the drone enables a cross language translation between you as the cat and you, and with the companion robots. If you When you are separated from the drone, which is called B12, you can't understand the companions anymore. And so again, everything is still conveyed in human language forms, and you're kind of doing, to a great extent, you're doing the bidding of this drone, which again, you know, really creates the same hierarchies of human and animal that we see across very humanistic and anthropocentric understandings. And so I love Stray as a video game, and I think definitely has potential, but it also falls back into very humanist understandings, very anthropocentric understandings, despite the absence of any humans. I think this also happens in various video games. I'm trying to think who has written about this, because I was looking at this article the other day, about how we DHC companion species in video games, and that might often be through video games where you have a dog as your kind of sidekick. I thought I had this open, but I don't have it open. That's really going to bug me now. The which article that is, but yeah, it's interesting to see again how, um also, I think it was about the game Fallout, possibly, and about how you still have this dog, you kind of have this dog sidekick, but even in this post-anthropocentric world, sorry, post-apocalyptic world, um the dog is still fulfilling this kind of companion species subservient role. So I think a lot of games have potential to explore disruptions in different hierarchies, but don't actually quite get there. Another game that I'm presenting a conference paper on in September is Scars Above. Again, another kind. It's not quite post-apocalyptic. It's kind of pre-apocalyptic, um, but it's about, space travel and encountering others. And there are, in that game, there are AIs, there are mutants, and there are all these different kind of uh, creatures. And again, it still ends up being very much about the humans. So I think that there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in video game studies that explores these kinds of things, that explores the Anthropocene, that explores eco criticism in video games. We also see, for example, things like Horizon Forbidden West and Horizon Zero Dawn being written about in terms of how they demonstrate our precarious relationships with nature and technology. So I think that themes are there and are being explored, but I think they probably aren't radical enough yet.
Very true. Actually, just the other day, another graduate student of mine who is writing her thesis on Horizon Zero Dawn, we were discussing how, despite the eco-feminist, uh, you know, uh, the strong eco-feminist subtext in the text, the player still has to, for example, kill hundreds of animals in the course of the game in order to, craft some weapons or pouches. So yeah, there is great potential, but definitely room for further growth.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to hear from the audience. I think we had one hand raised, so but uh, yeah. participants, audience, would like to hear from you. Okay. So, by the way, oh yeah, go ahead.
AI? Yeah, sorry. It's not much of a question, but as we were talking about Polaris, and first of all, I'd like to mention that I haven't played the game, but uh, so far, what I understood that was that Polaris is kind of like this thing that guides you through the game. Is that right?
Yeah, not always,
Mm.
but that kind of shimmering that I showed over certain things, that will kind of guide you as like, "Oh, this is the way to go," or, "This is the thing to interact with next." Yeah.
Mhm. And speaking of animals, I don't know whether we can call cephalopods animals or not, but Polaris looked awfully like a lot like Nautilus. So as Nautilus represents order in the chaos and all these random, let's say, genetic stuff that happened that led to the creation as we know it, and like that caught my eye. It just popped into my head that maybe it's not totally random that Polaris looks like a Nautilus. I just wanted to put that out there.
No, that's really cool. I hadn't thought about that at all. But I will definitely explore the because as you say, I mean, of course, all game designers make these choices for a reason. So it's a good point to explore that reason a bit further. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Ruby, please.
Hi, everyone. Well, actually, I just want to say that I really enjoyed this lecture so much. Thank you for everyone who just kind of planned it and conducted it. I just want to ask something about the main character, Jesse. Like, are there any signs of, let's say, uh, we can't call it breaking with tradition, but somehow like that in the appearance of Jessie, like the hairstyle or the clothes that she wears, or I don't know, maybe any referrals to the way she identifies herself?
Thank you so much, Ruby. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the lecture. Yeah, so in my chapter in the book, I talk about this idea of how so Janine Engelbert talks about this idea of Engelbrecht talks about this idea of the fourth wave heroine, and she talks about the idea of desexualization, and so she's writing specifically about Lara Croft in the uh, newer Tomb Raider reboots, and she says, Lara Croft has been desexualized, and I say that Jessie is never she's not desexualized, she's just sort of unsexualized, and so she is based on a particular uh a real human being whose name I've currently forgotten, but she basically is never her clothes are always kind of covering the majority of her skin. She is not presented as a this in fact, yeah, if I can find it, she's wearing she has an athletic build, um, tied back auburn hair. She's wearing black jeans, t-shirt, and a leather zip jacket with black combat boots. And so she doesn't appear to be sexualized. As I say, she's voiced by Courtney Hope, an American actor and voice actor who also provides the likeness for Jessie and was used for motion capture for Jessie's avatar. So, sorry, I'm literally reading my chapter here. It should be noted that Hope in other roles is more apparently very slim, and she often uses her social media to promote fitness. But in Control, Jessie's original made outfit, which I just described, is very utilitarian, covers most of her skin, and does not accentuate her frame. When we unlock other outfits in the game, they are also very practical. At no point do the outfits veer into sexualizing or objectifying Jessie, and even paid for bonus outfits avoid this. I think at one point you can unlock like a hazmat suit, but it's that kind of thing. There's no, it's not even like you can pay for, playing her in a bikini. which is obviously would be completely inappropriate. So it's good. And so there is this kind of rejection of a sexualized subjectivity as well, like say through these relationships that she has with men in the game. The primary male-female relationship is between her and her brother, and Jesse's trying to get back to Dylan. And then her other relationships with men and women are usually very respectful. And again, you know, she has this kind of camaraderie with these NPCs, and so it is a really refreshing game to play from that perspective. I do think there are still you know, potentially gendered elements of the game which are quite interesting. So at certain points you can wander up to NPCs and they're basically they're talking about you. And so there's elements of workplace gossip, which is an interesting introduction from Remedy Entertainment, because you get this idea of people not necessarily trusting Jessie. And so there are kind of gendered aspects from that perspective, but yeah, she's definitely not presented in a sexualized fashion. She is just like a pretty kick-ass woman. And again, one of the things that Engelbrecht writes about in terms of the fourth wave heroine is a kind of mix of character traits that are both traditionally feminine and traditionally masculine. And she talks about both vulnerability and violence. And we see that through Jessie as well. We see vulnerability in her relationship with Dylan, but her very violent capabilities when fighting the infected hiss. So yeah, it's good.
Thank you. So, Amir Ali, the next question.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for your great lecture. It was really informative. I have two questions, actually, if it's okay. The first one is about agency. And I was going to ask you about how do you think agency has a role in like games that try to provide the gamer with choices that actually essentially affect the ending, for example, or the death or the living of the character. With this post-humanistic view, how does this agency, how's this agency explainable with this perspective?
Yeah, so good question. It basically the key thing when we think about video games and choice is that really what we are being presented with is the illusion of choice. Actually, we can't really alter that much. We might be able to alter which ending we unlock, but those are predetermined endings in any case. And even if we were playing a game or playing in a virtual world, for example, where there isn't a specific ending, and you might say, oh, well, from that perspective, we have the agency to develop our own storyline. It's about understanding agency not as that individual control, but as that ability to act within certain constraints. And those are both, you know, options and limitations. And so, you know, it's like when people say, oh, you can do anything in a video game. And it's like, well, that's a terrible example. I was going to say in Control, you can't fly, but she has telekinesis, so you can. But in Control, you can't dance in Control, right? I can't just make Jessie dance. Okay. So I have some elements of possibilities open to me of what I can do, but those are defined by what the game can do as well. So does that make sense? It's kind of from that perspective. It's not saying we don't have choices. It's saying that the choices that we have are 100% determined by the other things that are in that interaction as well.
Thank you. And my second question is about whether you know any sources regarding how world building and immersion work in video games.
Um, That's a great question. What I would say there is if you could email me, and I'll put my email address in the chat, and obviously anyone else, if you have any questions for me, you can also email me. But if you can
Thanks.
email me that, because I do, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, because someone just asked me this question the other day. And so I know that I've answered it. But yeah, so it's a good question. Drop me an email and I'll send you something over.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
But
you.
just one more thing, sorry. About agency, I was more like thinking about this question of agency and choice in comparison to other mediums of art, for example, cinema. The genre in question for me that interested me the most was the genre of horror. So, for example, in horror movies, you're like as someone who watches the movie, you're so passive, and the character is mostly passive, and something just happens to them, and you're getting frightened. But in horror video games, especially survival horror video games, for example, this question of agency, the very fact that you have control in a game, and sort of um, how to say it, alters the whole situation, and you have an active role in what the outcome should be, whether your character in the game, your this avatar is, for example, killed by the monster or not, or is frightened or not. That's part of it is mostly what I'm concerned about, rather than this whether we have 100% control or not. As you said, we don't. Um, uh, I was wondering whether you can also comment on this comparison between different mediums as well.
I think that some people would argue, and it has been argued in video game studies, that interactive mediums, you do have more agency. But I would also say that game studies has a really complicated understanding of agency, where it isn't just seen as the player action. A reference for that, for example, is Bettina Bodie's book, Video Games and Agency. It's open access. The whole book is free. And she talks about, for example, specifically about this, how the spatial elements of video games also enact particular understandings of agency. So I think the key thing that I would come back to there is it really depends on what your definition of agency is. And as I say, it's quite a contested term within game studies because there's a difference between interaction and agency. And I would say what you're talking about more is potentially more on the interaction side of things, where you can also see someone talks about, I can't remember who this is, but someone talks about the in digital storytelling's layers of the interactive onion. And that talks about different levels of interaction. But yeah, I would say that those two terms are not to be used interchangeably, interaction and agency. So that's what I would come back to. It really depends on your definition of agency. And as I say, some people would argue some people would argue games aren't interactive. So that's also a big kind of buzzword in game studies. There's lots of kind of preconceived notions about video games that I think are in the field of game studies are explored in much greater depth. Because yeah, like I say, some people would say, well, they're not really interactive because you're still going down a predetermined set of potentialities. And so it's not that different because you've got different pathways, but you've also got different pathways that you could watch a film. You don't have to watch it start to end. You could click around and watch it from the middle and watch 5 minutes there, and click to the beginning and watch 5 minutes there. It's just the same way you're encountering the text. It's just a different way of encountering the same text. So it's a kind of contested area, I would say, which is up for debate.
Thank you so much. It was very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Just to follow up on Amirali's question, do you think the integration of artificial intelligence in the next generation of video game engines might complicate the question of agency?
Um, I want to say no. Um, I think that it will, yes, it will complicate the question of agency. But I think again, it comes back to what extent are these systems responsive, and also if we're thinking about responsive systems, what are the what are they responsive to and for? So again, there are still limitations. It's interesting when we think about taking those limitations away. But again, what is artificial intelligence created by? It's created by humans. It's created by very specific types of humans as well. We see, in a lot of, we see, for example, in algorithms, we see how coded the bias that is implicit within them. We see how there's, particular hierarchy is evident in those ways. So yes, it will definitely complicate things, but I don't think it'll necessarily complicate things as much as we might think. I'm not sure if it's me who's gone or it's Amir. Are you still there?
Oh, yes, I am. Just
Sorry,
disconnected.
sorry.
Okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
All right. So, Negin, would you like to ask the next question?
Yeah, hi, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, thanks for all lovely lecture. Thank you very much. And I wanted to ask regarding the disability studies and erasing Armenians. Do game creators consider optimization nowadays? I mean, in this case, is there any version of this game for people with disabilities?
Sorry, can you say that again, please? I missed that.
Sure. I wanted to ask that nowadays that you see more raising of awareness about people with disability in these things, do then creators consider these people um, do they create optimized game for these people or not?
Yeah, great question. And really, really interesting because there's real divergence here. So I was keynote at a conference in May on inclusive gaming, and there were some presentations then on disability in game studies and in gaming and in the industry. There is, I think, a growing acknowledgement of certain accessibility affordances and a neglect of others. So some video games and some video game companies will try very hard to make sure that their games are accessible and that they are inclusive. And there are other video games that might embody certain of those values through the assistive technologies that the game is compatible with, but not in other ways. So what I'm talking about here is, for example, the FromSoft Souls games are known for being very difficult, and they wear that as a kind of badge of honor, that they are very difficult games and they are sort of not for the faint-hearted, essentially. But actually, that is also an accessibility issue because the ability to do certain things might require, for example, certain response times. It might require certain specific controls being used, and that makes it inaccessible for a number of reasons. If you think about how certain games you have to do things at a particular speed, for example, for them to be right, or there's a very small margin of error, that can make a game inaccessible. That said, as I say, I think that there are more games assistive technologies. There's a company called Games Assist in the UK, and there is sort of growing hardware to make games more compatible and more accessible. There are also a growing number of games that feature disability as part of their maybe the narrative journey, part of the characters. And that can be really positive, because what we've seen historically is representations of disabled people that have been very discriminatory. So, in a horror game, it's always going to be like the baddie who has an amputated arm with a spike attached instead. That is how, amputees would be framed, that they're the baddie, like say, or that, it goes back to pirates, right? You've got Captain Hook with a peg leg and an eye patch. And actually, that's a representation of a disabled person. But if it's a representation of a disabled person as the, like I say, as the baddie. And so it's a really important aspect when we're thinking about video games and inclusivity now, that we're thinking about these larger questions of who are the characters representing, what different identities are available there, the different people who can play those games and access them. There's also one of the companies who was at Inclusive Gaming made a video game about being neurodiverse, for example. And so there are opportunities to have the potential to explore different experiences of different identities through video games. But that also we have to be wary of, because this is where we get what are sometimes called empathy games, where it's about connecting with a particular identity. And Lisa Nakamura has written about this in relation to identity tourism and the problems of racial tourism. Emil Hammer has written about the same idea of identity tourism in specific games. And Pozo has written about it in relation to LGBTQIA plus experiences, so queer experiences. And so it's there's a long way for the industry to go. And I think, again, one of the main things that we have to think about when aiming for progression is seeing more disabled people in the industry itself, seeing more disabled people working on the design of games, so that those games are being designed with those with people with disabled people in mind. That was quite a sprawling answer, sorry, but it's a really interesting field, a lot to be done, both in terms of representation, in terms of hardware accessibility, software accessibility, and then the actual themes of the games that are coming through as well. So yeah, great question.
Thank you. So, guys, we're almost 19 minutes into the session, so I think it's time to hear from Mehrzad, who's been in touch with Puppy for the past couple of months, and he's the head of the Digital Humanities Association with us. So, Mehrzad, go on.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank you for your great and informative lecture. And I had a question before, we want to finish the lesson. I know it's way past the time that we were supposed to have it, but I wanted to talk about and raise the topic of ludonarrative harmony in the game, because when I was first playing Control, it reminded me of Half-Life, the original one, 1998. And there were some certain things that I thought they were quite similar between the two. And when I was reading about it, I come across these things that, the environmental storytelling and mimetic narration and this aesthetic of continuity is present in Half-Life. We are not given a stat at every level, just like in Control. When you walk to a new place, it just, very large fonts in your face that says, I don't know, you have arrived at this place. And you are not given, this level starts and this ends. There's no, let's say, we have the continuity in it. And this is the same as what we can find in Half-Life. And my question was about more about the narration part of it, because in the game we encounter many journals and some sort of thing, videos that we have to watch, or like there's this TV that broadcasts something, and you have to you have to watch it. Or I wanted to ask this: does Jesse, as a person who represents, let's say, a post-human and fourth wave feminist, um, character, does she follow such directions of of the game that which gives to us? I mean, do we have that harmony in the Luna narrative? Because when we play the game, what game tells us is that Jess is the main protagonist, but when we actually play the game, we don't see this. I mean, she's given order by the janitor, by other male characters, and aren't do we have this harmony, or are they not? I mean, we don't have it.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I would kind of say yes and no, because on the one hand, because of this role of her as a director, I think about directors of organizations in the UK, and usually I think being a director means you get a lot of money and don't do a lot of work. Whereas Jessie, as you say, is kind of doing a lot of work. And so on the one hand, I sort of think, well, there is specific elements there of maybe a kind of disjuncture. On the other hand, she is literally the person with the most power. She is the one who is able to defeat the Hist. She is the one who is able to unlock new areas, who is able to unlock new items of power. And so we can't ever be in any doubt that she has more power from that perspective than other people. But very much she is that power is put to use by other people. And I think that it depends really how we view that, because on the one hand, as you say, I think, well, that doesn't look like she's kind of being respected enough, potentially. On the other hand, Jessie is using the goals of other people to essentially get her to her end goal of getting to her brother. And so it might be seen as a disjuncture, but they're kind of working, I guess they're not working in parallel, but they're kind of maybe working, diagonally to get to the same point. I think there are other elements where we see Jessie's frustration at the bureau when she discovers that they've been surveilling her, basically, when she discovers photos of herself and recordings of her therapy sessions. And I think it becomes this difficulty of, she is angry, but also she is now the person in control of this bureau, and she is the only one who can essentially change things. So I think that makes a kind of dissonance in the actual experience of that. But yeah, really interesting question, and I think it would be interesting to see other ways that it could have played out. But I think this is the thing with that dissonance. It's kind of, on the one hand, it doesn't necessarily resonate, but on the other hand, it might be necessary for the game. So I think they're probably the remedy are kind of taking artistic license a bit to to achieve their goals. But yeah, really interesting question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Because after all, it's a game, and you have to have this narration to unfold it, and there are some necessities. Yes, thank you very much. Great.
Thank
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Behzat or Armita, so I think it's time to wrap up. So, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry that I can't turn on my webcam. I'm quite sorry for that. But I would like to thank you all for participating in this session, and Dr. Poppy Wild to accept our invitation. It was a very great, illuminating, informative lecture on control and post-humanism. And I want to also thank Dr. Rafaf for his chairpersonship and managing the event and asking great questions. And thank you all the participants. I hope you enjoyed the session. And if please follow our events. And if you have any question, Dr. Wild has put her email in the chat box. You can be in touch with her. Any questions regarding this matter. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. I just want to say as well, thank you so much, everyone, for giving up your time to listen to me. And again, if you haven't played the game, then I do recommend it. Thank you so much to Mirzad for the invitation, specifically for bearing with me, as it's been a really busy period for me. So thank you very much for your patience. And thank you so much for all coming. Thank you to Armita for launching the session. Thank you so much to Professor Vahas for running the session and chairing. That's been excellent. So thank you all so much for your time. As I say, please do drop me an email if you have any questions or follow-ups, and have the best of time playing video games and studying.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, Poppy. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks all. Thank you. Bye-bye.